you talked a little bit about Sandra Locke. Do we think the Sandra Locke story and suit and everything is kind of the most controversial part of his story?
For me, it's certainly the ugliest. She was a young actor, came into the business, was nominated for an Oscar for her first movie role in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. She's in Willard, the first Rats Attack movie, the prequel, which was followed by Ben. And she meets Clint. She auditioned for a role, didn't get it. And then a few years later, he hires her for The Outlaw Josie Wales. They start an affair immediately. And they were together for the better part of 10 years. Very publicly, they bought a home together that was meant to be their forever home, and she redecorated it. According to her autobiography and court filings, he insisted twice that she have abortions and then have a tubal ligation so there would be no more unintended pregnancies. She complied with all those requests. And then they drifted apart and he chose other partners, and she was locked out of the house that she had basically chosen and built and designed. The contractors, when it came time for depositions, they said, yeah, I never got instruction from him. She was there every day, this sort of thing. And he offered her a settlement of a palimony case. And it turned out that the settlement was part of a fraud between him and Warner Brothers to pay her off, to keep her from putting his name into headlines, and basically freeze her career as a director and actress. And that became public, and that was the second trial. It was just a really ugly thing, and it was indisputably a case of him exercising his power, his privilege as a movie star, as a man of influence in their industry, as the holder of the purse strings. It's just really ugly. And Sandra Locke is a complex person. She fudged the truth about a lot of things that went on. She was married, by the way, herself the whole time they were together, to a childhood best friend who was a gay man. They never consummated their relationship. They were traveling together as actors, and then when she came to Hollywood, he came with her. And the only way to explain that to the world was that they were married in the late 60s. If you were to run people out of Hollywood for one or both of the partners being gay and being married to hide that, you would have no movies.
Yeah.
So, she was not, she lied about her age. She dramatized a lot of things about what happened to them. Third parties were like, well, not so much. But that said, she was mistreated from the moment that Clint decided he was done. And, he was about to get hit with a massive settlement, a jury finding penalty against him for what he and Warner Brothers did to her. And by the way, there was a third trial, and Warner Brothers was found guilty of defrauding her and paid her somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million.
It's remarkable. It's also, it's kind of amazing that they were able to prove that, because like part of the suit was like, I was given this deal to produce, like a development deal or whatever it was, to sort of like, but then every project kept getting rejected. And so she's kind of saying like, I know that Clint is making, it's, you guys are screwing me. It's a tricky thing to prove, because there's lots of movies that don't get greenlit. There's lots of projects that, we'll try to know, but I guess there was enough of a paper trail.
Somebody, ironically, on the, whoever was doing the accounting for Unforgiven accidentally put the payoff money to Sandra Locke that Clint was paying the studio to pay to Locke, claiming to be the studio's money, showed up in that budget.
Oh,
and
wow.
In discovery, in the suit against Warner Brothers, that paper came up, and they had them dead to rights. There was no reason for Clint Eastwood to be paying Warner Brothers $500,000 a year, other than the $500,000 that they then paid to Sandra Locke.
Right.
And nobody could deny that.
So, as we're sort of getting towards the end here, what do you see as like the major? Do you see his career as having kind of like big eras? I mean, obviously, the sort of obvious one would be like his early Western era, between the Sergio Leone and Rawhide, and then, you mentioned like Tightrope and what other one did you talk about? There's one that was right around Tightrope time. It was Pale Rider, yeah. And it seemed to me like there's a few turning points. Like that era seemed to be like the first time when like, oh, he started getting some real respect. And before that, it was like, yeah, he's a box office star, but whatever. It's so that to me is like, did that set off a new era? Then there's obviously like the Unforgiven era where he got the most respect. And then sort of later era. I don't know. How do you separate his when you think about his career, or is it sort of more a continuation?
There's a period where he was a Western actor. Even Dirty Harry, was is really the only movie where he plays his first movie that was a hit, where he plays a contemporary guy. Dirty Harry and Play Misty for Me came out right around the same time. And he had made one or two films prior to that where he wore 20th century dress. And they were small films. Coogan's Bluff, which is, he's wearing a cowboy hat. He's in New York and he's riding a motorcycle instead of a horse, but it plays like a Western. Dirty Harry also plays like a Western in a sense. But there's a Western era, then there's a superstar era, and then there's an era where he just starts to become serious about his art. And he starts directing more frequently than acting, and he's only acting for himself. Pretty much after Unforgiven, he appears in The Line of Fire for Wolfgang Peterson. He appears in a movie called Trouble with the Curve for Rob Lawrence, who was a longtime producer of his, who was making his debut as a director. But other than those two, he directs every movie that he's in, and he's directed more movies that he's not in than that he's in. He will take a role if it's perfect for him, such as $1 Million Baby, The Mule, Cry Macho. Though he's not in Juror Number 2, his most recent film. He could have been sat there in the jury box. He would have distracted people. So like there's definitely a move from being a working actor to a superstar to an auteur. Someone with a set of themes, and you can see the themes. Like in the 80s, he makes Bronco Billy, Honky Tonk Man, Bird, and White Hunter Black Heart, which are all movies about artists who are so driven that they ruin the lives of everyone around them and their own life to get their art made. And then he starts, after Unforgiven, almost every movie he makes is about an act of violence or an act of cruelty that has repercussions in the lives, not only of the victims, but of the perpetrators. $1 Million Baby, it's a punch. Mystic River, it's assuming that someone is a murderer. American Sniper, the most decorated soldier, sniper in American history, cannot live with himself, and these are the themes. He also does a lot of movies. There's this period that begins around the time of American Sniper, Sully, Richard Jewell, J. Edgar, movies about true stories, Changeling, that show something wrong in the system. Sully does something heroic, and he's basically on trial for a couple of weeks. People thinking, oh, you could have made it back to the airport. Yeah. And how crazy is it that Clint Eastwood, who went down in the Pacific as a GI in 1952, gets to live long enough to direct Sully, and Sully's a crackerjack movie. We all know how Sully ends. Yeah. And yet you're on the edge of your seat. It's a real thriller. And Clint, the spareness of his movie making is in full-fledged glory in that. During the entire crash and rescue sequence, no music.
For a guy who loves music and wants to put jazz piano and everything.
Spielberg or someone like Sidney Pollack would have filled with strings, and Clint's like, there's nothing more dramatic than what I'm showing.
Oh yeah, unnecessary.